Man, this is a tough one, but we got to get into it. So let's do it. Right now, we're looking at some numbers from July's jobs report. Now, if you're somebody that is out there and you are actively looking for work, this is probably not going to be exciting news for you to hear, but we got to go ahead and, just tell the truth anyway. So I'm going to go ahead. I got my laptop in front of me right now. So I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about what happened. So, the jobs forecast, or the jobs numbers, came out for the whole month of July. And right now, what we looked at least that was forecasted was 104,000 jobs that were supposed to have been gained in the previous month. What actually ended up happening, 73,000 jobs were added to the market. Now, the problem with this is that's 33% below expectations. The unemployment rate is still kind of holding steady around 4.2%. I believe last month it was like maybe 4.1. So it's only risen a little bit. I'll double check those numbers to be sure. But the problem with this is showing a bit of a stalling in the American economy, especially when it comes to the job market. Now, to give a little bit of extra context about why that is also following a more negative trend, June's numbers, which were originally at 147,000 jobs, were revised downwards at a loss of 14,000 jobs. And then May's numbers were revised downwards at 144,000, but it was at a loss of 19K. So those combined months together make for a combined downward revision. A downward revision basically is when they go in and they double check and make sure that the numbers that they're receiving are actually correct, job retention, so on and so forth. And that downward revision is basically saying, hey, these numbers that we actually thought were coming in, we're actually going in and we're revising the numbers to show accuracy on all fronts. And so they went and found out that there were at least a couple of thousand jobs, about a couple tens of thousand jobs in these 2 months that were not, that they had to revise downward, or essentially show that these are not, fully accurate after doing all the reporting and numbers, which, they always do. This is a combined downward revision of 258,000 jobs, okay? Now, health and social assistance seem to have added 73,000 jobs, so that's probably where the bulk of these jobs are coming from. But manufacturing and government jobs have declined. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, that we have tons of manufacturing jobs in the United States, right? But because of the fact that many people are not either qualified to do these jobs, they're not interested in them, or given the fact of what's happening right now with all of the efforts with immigration and deportation, those jobs are not seeing a lot of, interest. They're not seeing a lot of interest in hiring, even though companies are desperate to hire these people to fill positions. And so you might say to yourself, okay, well, what does this mean? Well, upon hearing this news, CNBC reported that the Dow dropped about 400 points, of course, because this shows a bad signal for the short-term economy. It shows that companies and business owners, CEOs, when they're projecting the future in the short term, they are not confident that the way the economy is moving, a lot of the decisions based off of tariffs, they're not confident that this is showing a strong or positive move in the economy. Now, Donald Trump has, tried to, get Jerome Powell, who is the Fed chair. The Fed is supposed to act independently of the government. He's tried to get him to go ahead and change the interest rates. But in many ways, if the economy was doing well, a sign of wanting to change the interest rates would literally be that the economy is having a problem and that you would have to do so. So this administration has consistently and confidently stated that the economy is doing well, that things are on the right track, that tariffs are going to be good for us. Donald Trump has, many ways said that he is a tariff guy. But then if that's the case, and we see these jobs numbers, as well as looking at the fact that he wants them to change the interest rates, this does not hearken unto a positive economic standing or us moving in the right direction. So what does this mean right now? Well, revisions are currently showing that there's deeper weakness than what headlines are really showing us. And to give a little context, excuse me, on that, there's a little bit of an article that I have here, and I just want to go ahead and read that to y'all, just so you have a little bit of context. Because once again, as I said before, context is very, very important. I don't want to just be out here giving you guys information that's not accurate. I don't want to be out here adding to the noise. Okay, so just give me 1 second. All right, I got to pull this one up one more time. All right, perfect. So this is just a couple of things to just explain to you guys essentially what's happening. So as I mentioned before, this is helping to confirm that our economic engine is sputtering. This is from CNBC.com. This is from a quote from Luke Tilley, who's the chief economist at Wilmington Trust. He says, "We are in a broad economic slowdown. Whether it translates to a recession or whether it translates to a recession or not is the question that I'm asking now." He said the labor market is, quote, "key, and it's hard to gauge what is going to happen." Okay. Now, there is a 50-50 chance right now that Wilmington is showing that the United States will slide into a recession. Okay. And Luke Tilley is citing concerns over the longer term hit from tariffs. As we've talked about, we talked about it months and months ago. This could depress consumer spending, which has driven 68 of all economic activity in the first quarter of this year, as well as business investment and hiring. Now, the Trump administration keeps saying, "Oh, but look at all this investment. These companies, they're investing, trillions of dollars." Those are essentially just pledges. Every time Trump keeps talking about how he went overseas and he got trillions of dollars in a couple of meetings from Saudi Arabia and all these companies, those are just pledges. Okay. They're not deals set in stone. They're not with, black ink on a piece of paper where it's been decided. These are just pledges. And at any point, those pledges can change. Okay. So this is something to keep in mind. It's almost like if you go and I'm hoping this is a fair comparison, but if you go and you say, "Hey, listen, maybe I don't have a ton of money in my bank account, or I do, but I want to go ahead and I want to maybe use a routing number and an account number to draft it out of my bank." That is you essentially pledging, and the company is believing in good faith that you are going to have money in your account, that when they go through your bank, they can deduct that money. Well, if you go and deduct that money, or if they go to deduct that money, but there's no money there, well, then of course you get, you get an overdraft, or you get some sort of a notice on your account that you did not, that it did not go through. And I know some of you might be listening to saying a bank using a routing number and an accounting number to withdraw stuff. I only use Apple Pay or my credit or debit card. But essentially, that is to affect what is happening right here. A lot of these promises or these pledges are not physical deals. And Trump is walking around waving these pledges around like solid, solidified, economic deals, when really we don't have anything that we have fully solidified with these countries. And so we're going to keep monitoring this. As I mentioned before, I do always like to look at some of the bright side of this. Kind of rough. But right now, as we're looking at, it seems to be that, the picture is not super dire yet. The GDP has increased to about 3% in the second quarter of the year. So it slightly is vibrant to the degree, but right now we are having a weaker second half of the year. And the problem with this is that if people are not getting increased wages, or they're not being hired for jobs, or businesses are nervous about where the economy is going, people will cut back on spending. Businesses are going to cut back on their investment, and the economy at that point can land in a recession. So I just want to be honest with you guys about, what I'm seeing here. This is a below potential pace that the government's that the economy is moving at, and the government is obviously taking note of that, whether Trump wants to spin that any particular way he likes. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at right now is the numbers don't lie, no matter how you want to move it or spin it. And we got to be honest about that. What I want to talk to you next about is Trump firing the BLS commissioner for releasing this report. Now, Ann Walker was the BLS commissioner who, as I just broke the news to you, in case you haven't been paying attention or maybe hiding under a rock or trying to stay from the news, whatever. But Trump fired BLS Commissioner Ann Walker within hours of her releasing the 73,000 jobs numbers report, as well as the downward revision information. And the problem with this is, and the White House says this, quote, "We refuse to tolerate inaccurate data that damages American strength." The problem with this particular issue is, if these numbers are correct, which we have no reason to believe they're not, that they're not motivated by politicization or anything of the sort, because Trump was praising this very same jobs commissioner, or at least praising the report that showed positive numbers. What is nerve-wracking about this is that you have a president who believes that if the numbers do not match what makes him look good. They talk about how it undermines American strength, but really what you have is you have an authoritarian-like figure who doesn't like to look wrong, who doesn't like to admit, hey, listen, maybe we're wrong about the direction that we're going on American policy or economic policy, tariffs, whatever you name it. And so instead of admitting that and saying, how do we fix this, right? Because true leadership means that we're going to make mistakes, but not this guy, right? The narcissism and the unwillingness to admit defeat or look like you've made a mistake is driving this president to try to make these numbers look better than they are, and is firing somebody simply for being accountable, simply for showing that these numbers are not good. Now, the problem here is a lot of Republicans, while some are dissenting, a lot of Republicans are in line with the president. You have Fox News out here that are cheering accountability, while the New York Times is saying, hey, if we're going to be out here punishing people for reporting proper numbers, that basically means that this could be a very, very dangerous move against integrity of data. Okay. And so what the issue here is that with nobody to stand up and speak the truth on these matters, what do we do? Because if we're losing integrity over numbers coming out that the president doesn't like or someone in charge doesn't like, how do the American people, how does somebody like you and somebody like me get the facts on these matters? How do we know what is true? How can we trust, with all the things that have been happening, whether it's the Epstein thing where they're finding, a minute or more on the prison tape has been edited, where they're finding that Trump is saying there is no Epstein files after saying there were Epstein files. When people are coming out from the White House and saying, hey, listen, there are reports of certain events that are happening that are totally true, and they're being fired or they're being removed, how do we then trust the information that is being given to us? And so we're just continuing to see from this president and this administration a lack of accountability, a lack of honesty surrounding what the truth is. The president continues to say that the election in 2020 was stolen from him. And there's just these repeated narratives about things that years later, even after winning, he is repeating this false narrative. We have to come to terms with the fact that if we continue to look and point at everybody else, and if we're continually hearing that everybody else is lying, that everybody else is not true, should we not at some point, as intelligent, educated, and people with some sort of common sense, maybe you're not the most educated person out there, but you might have at least a granular amount of common sense, if not more, should we not be able to look at this and say, okay, if you point the finger and everybody else is wrong except when they agree with you, if that was anybody else in our corner in sports that we went to school with, our friends, would we not just call them a sore loser? I think it's worth us looking at that. At the very minimum, it's worth us taking a look at that.